Hello, this is Chris Browder, and this is video 3.2. We're going to talk about bilingualism. This video is largely based on the text How Languages Are Learned from Lightbound and Spada, and Second Language Acquisition Myths from Brown and Larson Hall. In this course, we've talked a lot about L1 learning and L2 learning, but what about bilingualism and multilingualism? Can someone have two L1s and can an L2 become an L1? Because of the way we've been discussing L1s and L2s, one might conclude that bilingualism is some sort of strange exception or a weird hybrid. This is simply not true. Bilingualism is actually the norm for humans worldwide, and this is not some new phenomena caused by globalism either. Multilingualism is the normal human state throughout all human history. Monolingualism is the exception. So, take the nation of Nepal, for example. It has 123 distinct languages. When I was living and traveling in the Himalayas during the 1990s, nearly every person I met was fluent in at least three languages. In some isolated rural areas of Nepal, people could be fluent in four or more languages despite having no formal education. So it wasn't a product of globalization or schooling or anything like that. So take Ghana, for example, too. Ghana has 50 indigenous languages in addition to English. Take the Philippines, for example. They have 13 indigenous languages and many others that no longer exist. And of course, they also have a lot of other languages brought in by outsiders, and English is one of those. Unfortunately, many people don't realize that bilingualism is normal and healthy. And in fact, sometimes multilingualism is even viewed as a problem by some people or even a threat. Public schools, for example, have a history of confusing the normal stages of bilingual development for developmental delays. Multilingual children are often pushed into remedial or special education programs that are not in their best interest. One of the main challenges for multilingualism in a largely monolingualist society like the US is people's lack of understanding of really what multilingualism even is. So, for that reason, let's start with discussing that. One type of bilingualism is simultaneous bilingualism. In this case, the person has acquired more than one language in early childhood. When this happens, the development of one or both languages might appear to be somewhat delayed, leading people to falsely conclude that there is some sort of problem or that one of the languages is hurting the other language. But giving credit where credit is due, the child is learning more than one language. If the quantity of language the child is learning could somehow be objectively measured, we would realize that adding up both languages, the bilingual child is really learning more language overall and learning much faster. Think of it as trying to eat two different pieces of cake at the same time. A child can eat both pieces of cake if he really wants to, but might need a little time to finish them both off. When the birthday party is done, what really matters is that he's eaten two pieces of cake instead of just one. What we don't want, however, is to stop a bilingual child from mastering at least one of those languages. We need to give the child time and support to finish learning at least one of those languages. Research shows that children in bilingual education might have lower reading scores in the first 2 years, but within 5 years are reading at higher levels in English despite having also learned the other language. We need to realize that children's education is not like running a 50-yard dash to see who is fastest in the short term. It's more like running a marathon and seeing who does the best in the long run. Life goes on long after a child does well or doesn't do well on that second grade reading test. More importantly, if the bilingual child is given the support she needs and not deprived of opportunities to access both languages, then she can acquire full mastery in both languages. While some delays might happen in the early stages, these cause no harm, no long term harm to the child, at least. In fact, there's overwhelming evidence that bilingual people have major cognitive advantages that can benefit them greatly later in life, besides the general benefits of having more than one language. Besides the occasional delays involved with simultaneous bilingualism, some people also get alarmed by the way bilingual children appear to be mixing their languages. Take Spanglish, for example. It gets little respect in either the Spanish speaking or English speaking communities. Researchers have found, however, that this mixing is not accidental or caused by any kind of deficiency or confusion. Researchers call this code switching, and research shows that it is intentional, strategic, and intelligent. It happens when bilingual persons are together speaking one language but simply choose to pop in a word from the other language because they feel it works better for them at that moment somehow. Throughout history, it is normal for languages to borrow words from other languages because they seem to be working better for that purpose. It caused no harm to the English language when people chose to use words from Latin such as village, agriculture, or famous. Similarly, no harm was done to English when people chose to use words from Spanish such as patio, breeze, or tornado. The question should not be about whether we should or should not allow people to be bilingual, but instead should be about how we can help bilingual children to develop both languages more successfully. As you may remember from lesson one, it is very difficult to master any one language. Bilingual children in the US often never master literacy and academic language in their heritage language because it is not being supported in schools. In other words, it is common for bilinguals in the US to have the basic interpersonal communication skills or BICS in their family language, but not have the cognitive academic language proficiency or CALP. This is a missed opportunity for those children, and it's a loss for the nation as a whole. In other words, waging a culture war to protect America from bilingualism gives our nation a competitive disadvantage against other nations. English does not need us to protect it. English needs no protection. English is doing just fine. But how can schools help bilingual children develop both BICS and CALP? I'm not going to get into the issues of bilingual education and language policy here. Maybe we'll do that some other time. But just sticking to the immediate question of second language acquisition. Bilingual children simply need educators and educational policymakers to understand language acquisition. For example, people shouldn't assume an English learner has mastered English and no longer needs ESOL support because he's mastered some English BICS. As we've discussed before, bilingual children can acquire BICS in only a year or two and may have really good pronunciation, and you might think, based on their pronunciation, that they're done learning English, but they need continued support for their English development for 5 to 7 years. We need programs that help these children without segregating them, depriving them of other opportunities, or stripping them of their heritage language. Many researchers are concerned that English only education may actually be harming bilingual children. They are concerned that many of these children stop learning their home language and even lose it once placed into English only daycares, preschools, and kindergartens. William Lambert has referred to this as subtractive bilingualism. There is significant evidence that subtractive bilingualism damages children's self esteem and family relationships. Ideally, children should learn the new language without losing the language they use to communicate with their mother and father. Many researchers, yeah. But what does it really mean to be bilingual? Many people falsely assume that you are not truly bilingual unless you have fully mastered both languages in all capacities: BICS, CALP, literacy, pronunciation, grammar, everything. This is not necessarily true, and it may not be possible or even necessary or helpful in many cases. Such people rarely exist in the real world because they don't need to. The reality is that we cannot simply classify people as either bilingual or monolingual. This is a false dichotomy. Most people are somewhere in between because, as we discussed in lesson one, language proficiency is very complex. It's not an on or off switch, it's not even a continuum, it's multidimensional. Someone can be very literate in a language but still have a strong accent. So, take Nobel Prize winner Henry Kissinger, for example, or Albert Einstein. Likewise, throughout human history, there have been people mastering languages without having any literacy or formal schooling in those languages. Many people don't have a writing system many languages don't have a writing system for people to even learn. That doesn't make them any less real than any other languages. So, to make sense of all this, it may help to discuss some of the different types of bilinguals. One type is receptive bilingual. This type of person grew up in a community or a family with a different heritage language than the outside world and learned to understand the heritage language without learning to speak it or write it. So they're understanding it but not producing it. This is very common for children of immigrants in the United States, and these children should not be shamed by anyone. After all, isn't 1.5 greater than 1? I mean, sure, 1.5 is less than 2, but it's greater than 1. One and a half languages is better than just one, so let's not shame these kids. When children learn two languages at the same time, we call it simultaneous bilingual learning. You can also call it compound bilingualism because they have one conceptual system in their brain that's attached and producing two different vocabulary systems. It's all connected, it's one system with two languages. Many children, however, start learning a second language when they start daycare or preschool. We would call this sequential or successive bilingual learning because they start learning one and then the other one comes later. In fact, they might already have developed a conceptual system in their mind for the first language, and they're simply learning the second language, building it on top of the first language. This is coordinate bilingualism. Sometimes the second language is learned at a later age or even adulthood. Yes, it's true. Adults can be bilingual. We call this late bilingual learning. And no, there is no objective standard we can use to say that the adult has or has not achieved bilingualism. All people whether they are so-called native speakers or so-called non-native speakers, all have strong areas in their language proficiency and weak areas in their language proficiency. We would not want to credit or not credit someone with bilingualism based solely on their literacy or pronunciation or mastery of grammar forms. There are illiterate native speakers and native speakers with speech impediments. We wouldn't want to call them non native speakers just because they're having trouble pronouncing their own language or reading their own language, right? Likewise, there are non literate bilinguals and bilinguals with strong foreign accents. They're all bilinguals, just different kinds of bilinguals with different degrees of bilingualism and different skills. All right, well, I hope this presentation was useful for you. Thank you. Bye bye.